ever feel like, sometimes companies seem to know you a little too well? Like, how do they do that? Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today. We're cracking open Eric Siegel's Predictive Analytics to, well, explore that. It's all about how organizations are using data to kind of get a glimpse of the future.
Yeah, and it's not about, crystal balls or anything. It's more about this idea of the prediction effect, this idea that even if you can just predict something a little bit better than random chance, it can make a huge impact on decisions.
Exactly. Like you said, getting a glimpse, lifting the fog, even just a little bit. And Siegel, he lays out some pretty mind-blowing examples of this in action. Like, get this, Target, the store, they figured out a way to predict which customers were pregnant, and get this, often before those customers had even announced it themselves.
It's pretty wild. What's really interesting is how they did it. They used shopping data. Apparently, women in their second trimester, they tend to buy, unscented lotions, certain vitamins. Oh, and this is the kicker, large quantities of cotton balls.
Cotton balls? Seriously, who knew that was a pregnancy tell? But it really shows you how, data points that seem totally unrelated can actually reveal these, hidden patterns in our behavior.
And those patterns, they can be valuable in all sorts of unexpected places. So, for instance, HP, the tech company, they used a similar kind of approach to figure out which of their employees might be thinking about leaving the company, their flight risks.
Smart. Get ahead of it.
Exactly. They looked at things like, how big someone's salary increases had been, how they were doing in performance reviews, even how often someone had switched jobs in the past.
So basically, if you're thinking about asking for that raise, maybe hold off on updating that resume for a bit.
Maybe so. Maybe so.
Okay, but this next example, this one feels like it's straight out of the headlines, Ready for this? Predictive analytics is actually being used by police departments. And it's being used to try to predict where crimes might happen before they happen.
Yeah, it's called predictive policing. And there's actually a pretty well-known example of this. The Santa Cruz Police Department. They used data from past crimes to create a model. And that model, it actually predicted the location of future burglaries.
Wow. So it's like, what, anticipating the next move in chess, but instead of checkmating someone, you're trying to stop a crime?
Exactly. And it really highlights just how much potential predictive analytics has to, potentially make things safer. And this isn't just happening with local police departments either. Bigger organizations like the NSA, they use these types of techniques, but on a much larger scale, obviously, to try to identify potential threats.
It's really pretty mind-blowing when you think about it, right? I mean, we're talking about using data to anticipate everything from how we shop to, potential crimes. But this is really just the tip of the iceberg. And Siegel, he doesn't stop there. He digs deeper into this thing he calls the data effect. Basically, it's this idea that, now with the massive amounts of information we have, we can start to see things, connections that we never would have even thought about before.
It's true. And we're not just talking about obvious stuff here. We're talking about finding correlations, patterns that were totally hidden before. Think of it like having, a superpowered magnifying glass. You can suddenly zoom in on human behavior in a way that we never could before.
And some of the things they're finding are just, kind of wild. Siegel talks about how data scientists found this weird correlation. Okay, you're ready for this. There's actually a correlation between, get this, liking curly fries on Facebook and having a higher intelligence score. I mean, what?
Yeah, it sounds crazy. But it's a good reminder that, just because two things are correlated, it doesn't mean that one is causing the other. Correlation doesn't always equal causation,
Right. Like that classic example that Siegel brings up, the correlation between Pop-Tart sales and hurricanes. Does that mean that people stocking up on Pop-Tarts are, causing natural disasters? Probably not.
Probably not. It's more likely that people are buying comfort foods like Pop-Tarts, when they're getting ready for a big storm. But even though some of these correlations seem kind of bizarre, they can actually be really useful starting points. Maybe it sparks an idea for more research.
Exactly. It's data is this giant puzzle, right? And we're just starting to put the pieces together. And speaking of putting things together, Siegel uses this really cool case study to show how machines actually learn from all this data. It's about Chase Bank. Apparently, they were trying to predict which people with mortgages were most likely to pay off their loans early, basically pay off their mortgage before they had to.
Yeah, it's a big deal for them, trying to anticipate that. And to do it, they use this thing called decision trees. It might sound complicated, but it's actually kind of simple. Imagine a choose-your-own-adventure book, but for data.
I love those books.
Yeah.
Okay, so how does it work?
So the model starts by asking a question, is the interest rate on this mortgage above a certain percentage. And then depending on the answer, it goes to another question and so on, like a branching path.
So it's like the model keeps asking questions, narrowing things down until it finally gets to a prediction.
Exactly. And the cool thing about decision trees is that they're pretty transparent. Like you can actually follow along with the model's logic, which is nice because some machine learning techniques, they're kind of a black box.
Yeah, transparency is super important when you're dealing with, people's money and finances and all that. But Siegel makes a good point. He says it's not enough for the model to be accurate with, like, old data, past data. The model needs to be able to generalize, to learn, so that it can actually make good predictions about new information, stuff it's never seen before.
It's true. And that's actually really tricky. You have to avoid this thing called overfitting, which is where the model basically just memorizes the data it's already seen instead of actually figuring out the underlying patterns. It's like, when you cram for a test the night before, you might ace it, but you don't actually learn the material, right?
Right. So you ace the test, but you don't really learn anything. So how do you get these models to actually learn and not just cram?
Yeah. Testing. You got to test them on data they've never seen before. That's how you know if they can actually handle new situations.
Makes sense. So, okay, we've got these decision trees, and they can predict things like, will someone pay off their mortgage early? But Siegel says it can be even more effective to combine different models together. He talks about this really interesting competition, the Netflix Prize. So these data scientists won $1 million, literally $1 million, by combining a bunch of different models together.
It's so cool, right? It just goes to show the power of, collaboration. Even when we're talking about algorithms.
Yeah.
Because each model, it's going to have its own strengths and weaknesses, right? Like it might be good at predicting some things, but not others.
Yeah.
But when you combine them together in an ensemble, they kind of make up for each other's weaknesses.
So it's like having a team of experts, right? Each with their own specialty, and they all work together.
Exactly. And just like with any team, the more diverse, the better. The more different the models in your ensemble are, the more likely you are to get a really good, really accurate prediction.
This is incredible. We've gone from predicting who's going to have a baby to who's going to pay off your mortgage to who's going to binge watch Stranger Things next, right? But here's where it gets really interesting and maybe a little, maybe a little creepy.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's creepy?
Well, we've been talking about predicting behavior, but what if we could go a step further and actually influence it?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Now we're getting into some really interesting territory.
It is kind of creepy, right? Is this messing with free will? I don't know. It just feels kind of, off.
I get it. It's definitely a big question, right? Something people have been debating forever. But with this uplift modeling thing, it's not like mind control, It's not making anyone do anything they don't want to do.
Right. Okay, that makes me feel a little better.
It's more like, how a good salesperson can kind of sense what's going to work on a customer, what they'll respond to? Mm-hmm. Like just by talking to them, reading their body language. It's like that.
Okay, yeah.
Uplift modeling just takes that intuition and scales it up. Uses data to find those same patterns, just, in a much bigger way.
Okay, that makes sense. But even if it's not mind control, couldn't it still be misused? What's to stop someone from using this stuff to spread fake news or, manipulate people, play on their fears?
That's the thing about any powerful tool.
Yeah.
Right? It could be used for good or for, not so good things. That's why the ethics of all this is so important, especially how these models are built, what data they're trained on, all that. Mm-hmm. Transparency is key.
So it's not just about the tech, it's about the people behind it, right? And the choices they make.
Exactly. Fire. Fire can keep you warm, cook your food, but it can also burn everything down. Mm-hmm. It all depends on how you use it. Siegel, he makes a really good point about, unintended consequences. We have to think about those too.
Okay, what if an algorithm says someone's likely to commit a crime? Doesn't that, make it more likely they will, just because now they've been labeled that way?
Exactly. That's that self-fulfilling prophecy thing. If you treat someone like they're going to mess up, they might just do that. Mm-hmm. It just shows you we still need humans in the loop keeping an eye on things.
Man, the more we dig into this, the more complicated it gets.
That's what makes it so interesting, right?
Yeah.
It's the cutting edge. More questions than answers. But that's how we learn.
So what have we learned? That predictive analytics is powerful and kind of scary.
It's powerful, yeah. But it's not about being scared. It's about understanding and being aware. Because the choices we make now, how we use all this data, it's going to shape the future.
It really has been a wild ride, this deep dive into predictive analytics, hasn't it?
It has.
We've seen how our data, even the stuff that seems totally random, can reveal these patterns about how we behave, about who we are. We've learned how machines can learn from all that and, try to predict the future. And we've talked about how powerful that is, but also, like you said, the responsibility that comes with it.
It's a good reminder, I think. Even in this whole world of algorithms, we can't forget about human judgment, critical thinking.
Absolutely. So to everyone listening, thank you for going on this journey with us, for diving deep into the world of predictive analytics. Remember, data is powerful, but so are you. Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.